Today we are going to welcome Annette Athy and Dr. Annette Athy to our podcast. This is my first official interview where I'm getting to have a guest, and I'm super excited to share with you guys. I met her and had the opportunity to really get to know her on a outing. We got to spend lots of time together and we just hit it right off. And she just had so many wise wisdom, golden eggs of tools and just different thought process that I just thought it would be amazing to have her on. So I'm just going to read a little bit about her. She's a grief specialist and a child development expert who has over 20 years of experience working with children and families, with a doctorate in counseling from University of North Texas. And she retired her clinical counseling license to better focus on empowering parents, educators, and professionals through grief education. Dr. Athy now runs an online coaching business that supports parents and grieving children and offers resources to combat grief illiteracy, which it was very enlightening for me to hear your take on that. It was like, I hadn't really thought about that. You also developed the Grief Storm Quiz, and that is to help parents understand and support their child's unique grief needs. And combining formal education with real-world parenting experiences has provided Dr. Athy the ability to have impactful support for families and navigating grief. And one of the things I learned is she also specializes in play therapy, which is one of the things I really wanted to kind of dive into today in just learning about that concept a little bit more. So welcome, Annette. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you.
So,
I'm so excited to be here.
thank you very much for coming. So I wanted to see if you'd be willing to just let's just pretend someone's never even heard or thought about the concept of working with and processing grief and trauma and that illiteracy concept you were talking about. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that? Because I feel we all have moments of grief, whether it's losing a person, a pet, whatever the thing is, we all experience grief at some time. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Grief shows up for all of us in so many different ways. And I think for the majority of people, we don't really know what grief is until we experience it ourselves. We kind of have this concept, but it seems far away. And when we have that grief, it can be this real heaviness. For some of us, of course, it's sadness. But what I find is that for a lot of people, it can even be this anger. And for parents who are dealing with kids who have grief, that anger can be scary because it's misinterpreted, that maybe they're doing grief wrong or incorrect. And I find that when it comes to just basic conversations about grief, it's uncomfortable for most of us. We, as parents, we don't want our children to be upset or hurting. We want to take away their pain.
Yeah.
Even as friends, as adults, as family, we don't like to have uncomfortable conversations, and grief is usually one of those uncomfortable conversations. And so it's almost that we come off making light of these heavy emotions, or we try to tell them, well, this person's in a better place, or it was God's plan, or we kind of give them these substitutes that somehow it makes it okay that their loved one or their person is no longer here in the physical world. And unfortunately, that just really dismisses this love that we have for our person who's no longer physically standing in front of us. So what do we do with this love, this deep sadness that they're not here anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when I was hearing you talk about certain scenarios where there were agreements or kind of standards set around a person who had experienced a loss, in that it was like, okay, to the friend or family and the friends extended, it was like, okay, we're not going to talk about this. Like, in support, we don't want to upset them. So we're not going to discuss the person that's been lost or passed away in front of whoever it is. And I just thought, oh, how painful to, I haven't personally experienced that, but thinking of here you are in grief and all of a sudden you're, it's just like, oh, it's just not spoken about, like it never happened. So
Yeah.
sad of a way to set them up for feeling isolated in their feelings.
That definitely, and it really makes you feel alone that you can't connect with somebody or share your tears or the sadness or even the anger that this person isn't here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, that was kind of a life-changing moment for me when I lost my aunt when I was 19. Um, we shared a birthday. She
Mm-hmm.
was always the one who was very caring and nurturing. She had 3 boys of her own, and it was a very sudden, unexpected death.
Oh.
And when that happened, everybody in the family was there to support them as they went through this loss. The boys were 12, 9, and 6. And their dad, of course, now suddenly becoming a single parent. We lived in a small town. Everybody was ready to jump in. However, as the college student, kind of standing back, so I wasn't there all the time, but I was just there enough. I
Mm-hmm.
could see that suddenly we no longer mentioned her name. The pictures that were on the wall were all taken down. All of her things that were hers were removed from the household, and it was almost like we were supposed to go on with life like she didn't exist. And I remember just having a lot of internal conversations with myself of, this isn't right. This isn't okay. Just because she's physically not here doesn't mean she didn't matter, or how, just trying to understand how can you be here 1 minute and then the next minute we're supposed to forget you,
Yeah.
we're
You
supposed
just,
to pretend
la la
like everything
la.
is okay.
Elephant in the
Yeah, kind of.
room.
Yeah, that head in the sand.
Yeah.
And my heart just hurt so much for her 3 boys
Mm-hmm.
who were looking to the adults for comfort. And unfortunately, the message that they continued to hear from some of the family members who were trying to support their dad were things like, be strong for your dad, be strong, hold it in, kind of almost that, just
Suck
go
it up.
unnoticed, don't cause any problems, don't have any emotions or feelings about this because it makes your dad feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kids tend to be egocentric, which means they believe that the world revolves around them, and it's developmentally appropriate. That's how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
However, in this kind of a situation, what those boys internalize is, I'm doing something wrong. If I'm sad or I miss my mom, then I'm causing problems to everybody else. I'm
Yeah.
part of the issue, or I could have prevented this from happening, which is completely untrue. But as a child, that's part of that thinking process
Yeah.
that we all have. And I'm sure we can all think about events in our own childhood, whether they're grief related or otherwise, with parents' divorce or things like that. We somehow think as a child, if we would have been better, if we would have been more lovable, more worthy, then these bad things wouldn't have happened, which is, again, completely untrue. But if the adults in your world aren't making it very clear with verbalizations, meaning we're speaking the words, this is not your fault,
Mhm.
It's okay to have your feelings. If we're not saying those things, then kids make their own assumptions. They make up their own understanding of what's happening.
Mhm. I actually feel like as I'm hearing you say that, I think it's that way even with adults to like in a relationship where things are like that happen and maybe your partner's um, trying to process their grief or, I can see how we even as adults not necessarily getting equipped with the right tools um can kind of twist things in our own head too and be like, what did I do? Like, what I don't want to be a burden to other people because I'm having this sadness. So I'm just not going to say anything about my feelings. So I can see how some of that would even, might be a little bit different version, but I can see how that would even be possible for us if we're not. I just think there's not enough. It's just like a taboo subject. When people pass away, I feel like I've had friends that were like, I feel like I'm not allowed to bring it up, like, people are gonna be annoyed that I'm still talking about it, like, I just still wanna talk about this person, and so there's this, like they feel like they're not allowed to even mention, as an adult, they're like, "Well, I feel like I'm irritating people because 'cause I'm still talking about my dad that I lost or something," and yeah, that just made me sad to know people felt like that. And so in my past experience, like when I've like had someone that I've met that you can tell they're wanting to talk about that person instead of being like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm like, will you tell me something you loved about them? Like, get them to share some of their favorite memories with me because it's like they're hungry to have that opportunity, and I feel like people that are grieving don't get enough, opportunity to just speak about them and remember them, and just remember the love they had for that person.
Absolutely. I think that's such a beautiful invitation for you to give people. And I think most of us just naturally say, I'm so sorry,
Mhm.
because we really are like,
Yeah.
and especially if we've had our own grief, we deeply feel that pain and we are sorry that they're experiencing that. But we don't often follow it up with, tell me the name of your person, or uh,
Mhm.
just like you said, that beautiful invitation of, tell me something about them or tell me a story. Like bringing that person's memory into the present is so important. And I think, like, I noticed with my youngest, who was only 2.5 when her dad died, um, she doesn't remember him. She doesn't have these visual memories of him. And so she
Mhm.
relies on us to talk about him. She obviously will have physical memories or sensations of him. My belief is we lock those memories in our muscles. We have those from birth on, but those visual memories where my older kids can pull up and say, "Oh, I remember when Papa used to say this or do this." She doesn't have those. And so, in fact, just about a month ago, she had brought that up. I don't remember him. And I said, I know you don't. You were super tiny. 2.5 is really young. But let our memories be your memories. So
Mm.
anytime you're wanting to remember or you're wanting the reminder about him, let's pull out his picture book. Let's tell the stories, which in my household, we tend to do that a lot anyways.
Mhm.
But sometimes we don't know when our kids are thinking about their loved ones or if they're on their mind. Um, so again, extending that invitation is so important, but then also us making sure we're not just waiting on our child's invitation,
Mhm.
because sometimes our kids' personalities, they're not going to initiate. They're waiting for us to bring it
Mm.
up.
Mhm.
And I think that's where parents sometimes miss the mark. And again, not intentionally,
Mhm.
but they are waiting and they're kind of ready, like they're on guard and like, okay, I'm waiting for the conversation. I'm waiting for my child to come and ask me. I'm ready. I'll talk about it. I'm ready to share. However, most kids don't know how to start that conversation.
Yeah. I don't think
I
adults
don't
do either.
and
I really
exactly.
don't.
Yeah, and if we don't know how to do it as a kid,
Yeah.
lots of times that carries over to adulthood.
And then you're
And I
parenting and you don't know how to, yeah, no, it's
Mhm.
definitely a trickle down. So, one of the things we talked about before was play therapy. And one of the things I personally am passionate about on my podcast is just talking about like how do we make more capacity for joy. And a recent episode I did, it was like talking about using play and to deal with things and like experience breakthrough or helping my process things because I often will feel stuck with something emotionally, so stopping and making myself do something. um like I literally skipped around my living room. I was like, I haven't skipped in a long time, so I'm gonna skip around my living room. And I did it with this class and I was like, that was so much fun. It just instantly put me into this different space energetically and emotionally, that it was like, okay, it opened me up. So I was hoping you might share a little bit about how you use that in your therapy and like the power of play when you're dealing with grief.
So with play therapy, just for those who maybe don't understand or know about play therapy,
Mhm,
um, play therapy is a mode of communication for children. So children don't always have the verbal skills or capacity to share, here's what's going on with me, here's how I'm feeling. I mean, wouldn't it be great if our kids sat down in the chair and sat across from mom and dad and said, hey mom, I really don't like it when you do this, and I'd feel better if you do this. I mean, that sounds amazing, but in reality, that's not going to happen, especially in our younger kids. So play therapy gives them a place where they can play out or act out the things that they're feeling, things that they're processing. Um, in traditional play therapy, you use a room with specially selected toys. So each toy in the room has a reason. They're not that they are used one specific way, but you want toys that allow them to communicate in a variety of ways.
mhm,
And I prefer that we don't have a lot of the electronic things, that it's more the child has to operate the toy.
mhm,
And that allows them to really get in with their creative play and to untap or tap into what their deeper feelings are. So as a play therapist, I then interact and provide this safe space for kids to explore their feelings, playing through the toys. There's usually themes that are happening with this play. And specifically with grief, oftentimes what I see is in the younger kids, they're acting out the grief scenes that they processed or that they witnessed. So, for instance, they might be playing out the funeral procession, or they might be playing out burying their loved one in the sand and then pulling them out and putting them back in. Um, Sometimes it's that literal in their play. Other
mhm,
times it might be a little bit more subjective, and so it might be playing with the animals, and one of the animals dies, and then the adult animals are just wandering or looking for the baby and can't find the baby. And so you can really see like they're trying to understand, what does this mean? How do I feel about this? As well as you're going to get an idea of how are the adults handling it? Because most likely that's going to show in their play.
yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's very helpful because then I can go back to the parents and talk with the parents about, here's what I'm seeing, here's some things that would be helpful. Um, it it's a way to kind of take the grief conversations to a deeper level. With some of my kind of middle school or high school kids, we do more of activities. So it's still a play-based kind of thing,
Mhm.
but we're finding a way to approach grief that's a little bit safer, a little bit more in the creative realm, which taps into that emotional side. It kind of opens us up because many of us, let's be honest, the real world likes us to stay in our head, stay neck up, meaning we
Mhm.
just talk about our feelings. We don't necessarily feel our feelings. And when that happens, then you potentially have somebody who just comes and just talks. And they just want to say, well, I think this is what's happening. And they just want to be very logical about
Mhm.
their grief. And that only is going to get them so far in the grief process
Mhm.
until they feel their feelings, because grief has a way of waiting in your body until you decide to emotionally feel it.
In
And
your
it's
heart space
uncomfortable.
or
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can really be uncomfortable. It can be painful. It can be really heavy.
It
And
seems like it can sometimes even feel scary if you're somebody who hasn't let yourself feel a lot of emotions that when you like crack that open, it can be like, am I gonna lose control and not be able to rein it back in? Is it gonna stop once I let it out?
yeah,
Um,
and I think the phrase out of control is probably the best descriptor,
mhm.
because grief does come in those waves. It comes or feels kind of out of nowhere. And when it feels out of nowhere, we feel out of control. And that feels scary. That feels like here's this thing that's attacking me.
Mhm.
And how I explain that to parents and kids is my grief storms. And so the grief storms are different versions of storms, and those storms kind of roll in. And if we feel them, if we allow them to come in, they will flow out. But often what happens is we try to distract and we try to stop the storm,
Mm,
which just creates a bigger buildup, and it creates a bigger storm. It doesn't
mm.
really save us from anything.
I like that analogy that like if you don't let the feelings come through and pass, like a storm usually passes through. I just want to repeat that because I think that's huge. Like if we don't allow those feelings to come through our heart space and feel them and trust that they will dissipate and move away, then it's just going to build into this massive pressurized storm that's like a hurricane. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
where
it's
the
a
storm
whole,
is
now there's
even bigger.
damage,
Yeah,
right? Now we've got damage around, we've got collateral damage because we're like, ah. So yeah,
mhm.
I like that. It's a really good analogy.
Yeah, the other visual I like to use or remind people that I work with is that, I don't know, maybe you've heard the analogy between the cows and the buffaloes with
Yes, I
storms.
love that one.
Yeah,
Yes, please
yeah.
share.
So with the cows, they tend to run away from the storm. They think they're ahead of the storm, that they can outrun the storm, and that they're going to be safer. And so they're just running scared, trying to get away from it. Well, the storm is always behind them and will always catch up with them because they can't outrun the storm.
Yeah.
But because they're running from the storm, they're actually in the storm longer.
Just
And so
got
when
chills.
me too. So when we look at grief, if you're running from the storm, if you're protecting yourself from these grief emotions and not allowing yourself to have them, it means you're grieving for longer. It's
Mm,
going to be harder. That storm is going to be bigger. It's You're going to feel it because it is going to catch you eventually.
mhm. Yeah.
No matter how much you binge watch Netflix or play Candy Crush or eat chocolate or all the things,
Yeah.
it will find you.
Yeah.
Where what buffalo do is they actually run towards the storm. And by running towards the storm, they're actually in the storm for less time because they hit it head on.
Yeah.
And they, in my opinion, how I view it is they're like, okay, I'm here, I'm ready. Like, let me feel it, let me get through it,
Mhm.
because I know this will get me to the other side quicker.
Yeah.
This will bring me the relief that I'm looking for.
Got chills again. Okay, I want to be the buffalo. That's
Absolutely. And I think if we understood that, we'd all want to be the buffalo.
right.
But when we don't know, when we're just kind of a victim of our subconscious thoughts, and when, again, going back to the grief illiterate society we're in, if we just keep following what everybody else is doing by not talking about grief, we
Mhm.
all remain like the cows. We
Yeah,
keep running from the grief, and there's a lot of grief in our world.
lot of pain and loss. Do you think, I think about other cultures and countries where I feel like we don't have this in the US, is that some others, like there's the Day of the Dead and there's a celebration and coming, and there's like a celebration. Think about, different cultures that have a day to like, celebrate that connection they still have with someone that they've lost. Do you think that that allows them to have a different relationship with grief that we just don't really hear a lot about here in the US?
I definitely do. And it's interesting that you brought that up because I'm kind of looking more into the indigenous Native American traditions and
Hmm.
culture. And I think there is something to be said about these rituals, or, whether it's this yearly holiday, this something, whether it's we put it on the calendar or it's something that's recognized worldwide or through our culture. I think it's so important that we have this day. And I think it's even more important than just like, for instance, we celebrate my dad's birthday. That's kind of our big, okay, let's talk about him. It's all about him. And he died 9 years ago. And so we've been doing it every year. I don't like to celebrate his death day. To me, that just doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
Like, that's not a day I want to celebrate. I
Yeah.
will never be okay that that is the day he left the physical
Yeah.
world. And so it just doesn't align with me. I will do something to honor him, but not a celebration. That just
Yeah.
doesn't align for me. But I think what I've also noticed over the last few years, and I think COVID was a huge influencer of this, where people couldn't have funerals because they weren't allowed to gather.
Hmm.
And many people have moved away from organized religion. And so they do more of like the celebration of life. However, I think there's something important that we're missing of that ritual part, that honoring their life, but also honoring their death. I think
Hmm.
we have missed one of those pillars
Yeah.
and really need to kind of look at how do we change this?
Hmm.
Because although we may not agree with the way that the religious rituals, or even um, a different culture's ritual, there's something that anchors that ritual. There's something for families to be able to know that they did these things and they knew what to expect, they knew what was coming, and then it gave them a place to really be sad. And there are some cultures where you're not allowed to speak their name,
Mm.
the person who died, for a year. Like, that's your way of honoring them. Yeah,
Whoa.
there's other ones that are, um, you have to bury certain things with the body. There are just so many different
Hmm.
rituals out there. But again, I feel like as Americans, many of us have moved away from those traditional things, thinking they didn't want a part of that. But I don't know that we've replaced it with something that really helps them anchor grief.
Yeah. We and our family experienced some losses during that time where we couldn't gather, and it just felt like almost like it didn't happen, or so,
Mhm.
like it's kind of same thing of like, okay, well, they're just gone, nothing, like that's it. There's no, so I definitely felt that, like you said, kind of it was like an anchor point where you get to go like acknowledge that, feel the sadness, kind of ground in it and feel it and go, yeah, okay, they're gone. Um, it was very bizarre experience to not have that process for sure
Mhm.
during COVID. And you're
Yeah.
right, I have noticed there's a lot less of that since too, even though we can gather like that. A lot of that has kind of seems like there's less of the celebration of life that in person.
Yeah. But and I think there's something to be said about community,
Yeah.
not doing it alone.
Yeah.
Like for instance, with my dad, when he died in June. We Because it was so out of the blue and unexpected, we were all just in such shock. We decided to wait on his celebration of life,
Mhm.
and he was cremated, so it wasn't that we needed to do a burial. And that seemed right in the moment, and yet how I felt experiencing it in person is that 3 months later, it was no longer on other people's radar. It wasn't as important to other excuse me, to other people to show up for the celebration of life. Where I think had we had the celebration of life the week he died, because everybody was shocked, everybody was talking about it, everybody, was
Was
reaching
desiring that
out.
community to talk
Yes,
about
and
it and
wanting the
feel it.
connection, again, that anchor almost for the grief, but by putting it off, it suddenly wasn't as important to other people. Life continued
Yeah.
for everybody else, where I know for myself and for my sister, like it was very halting of, oh my gosh, life doesn't look the same and it doesn't feel the same. And I think for me, that is one of the major contributing factors of why my anger in grief was so high. So I was like, how does everybody else just keep going on? Like nothing has changed. Like my whole world is totally different. My best friend is gone and my life will never look the same. And everybody else is just doing
Acting
their thing.
normal.
Yes. Yes.
You need to
Yes.
suffer with me. I want you
Right.
I want you hurting with me. I'm still sad.
Exactly. And it was just I became very heightened, very aware of everything else that was just moving forward. And
Mhm.
I was also the one who wrote his obituary, and I've had to write several family members' obituaries, but just that process of I'm going to write about your whole 64 years of life in a paragraph.
Yeah.
That's all you're going to give me, a paragraph? I have to condense your whole life. Like it was again just those, as somebody who thinks a lot and can process and make words and all those things, it was very much a challenge to, okay, how do you really speak about somebody when you're limited to a paragraph or a page?
Right.
And and again, going back to if this person is your whole world,
Mhm.
how do you sum that up in a page? Like a page is never going to be enough. And to me, then, okay, it's obvious. Of course, we're going to grieve the rest of our life. Of course, we are. Like, this person meant the world to us.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So when you step into that process, um, do you feel like there's a normal people should, like, you've just lost someone important to you. Is there a normal process to this, like, to the grief that, um, that people should expect or feel like that's how it's supposed to go for themselves?
Well, and this is where I have a little bit different opinion than probably most.
Okay.
I know a lot of people talk about the stages of grief,
Mhm.
and if you listen to David Kessler talk about those stages of grief, actually were end of life care. They weren't, they were meant for the dying person, not for the grievers.
Hmm.
But that is not necessarily how, if you went to Google it, that's not what you would find out there. How it looks or appears or how it's talked about is this is the normal stage for grievers. You know, you're going to be angry, you're going to be sad, you're, going to go through all these steps. And as humans, we want this very logical, if I do this, I'll check the box, then I'll be good here, and I'll do this, and I'll check the box here. That's not how grief works. Grief is very messy, and it is a lot of back and forth. There's going to be the anger, there's going to be the sadness, there's going to be many different feelings. And to me, the most impactful thing that I think we don't talk about is we have the grief. So the person has physically died. We have grief because we have this love for them that we no longer can give to them physically. So now we have to figure out what to do with that love.
Mhm.
But the second part of that is all these secondary losses or secondary traumas that come about after the initial loss. So things like if I was a stay-at-home mom and my husband just died, now I have to go back to work. That's a change that my family didn't expect. If mom has died and mom was the stay-at-home mom, well, now my children have to go to daycare.
Mm.
Again, these are just a few. Lots of times when we're talking about somebody dying, we're talking about some type of inheritance or insurance. Um, there's money, and money brings out things in people that
The
we don't
best in
want to
people,
talk
right?
about.
Yeah.
But, for a lot of people, it then becomes these secondary traumas over people wanting things of the person
Mm.
who died, whether
Yeah.
it's physical possessions, their money,
Mhm.
where suddenly we're fighting over that. Or I see a lot of times where maybe it's an ex-spouse that died, and so the other parent has some relief in their death. However, the child is grieving because now they don't have this other parent.
Mhm.
And so there's different versions or different feelings based on who you are in these scenarios. And I think, again, that secondary trauma just isn't talked about
Mm-mm.
enough.
No, not at all.
And so I think sometimes we're shocked and surprised by these ripples that happen or we didn't see coming when this person died.
Wow, I think I haven't given a lot of thought to those secondary traumas that happen, like hearing and thinking about, like a mom, and then the child has to go to some, other care, just having that compassion for other people going through those sorts of scenarios, that it's not just the loss itself, it's everything that happens after that, and how many people go through that loss and the community pulls in tight. And then now
Mhm.
the day-to-day life needs to start happening. And like, that's when it gets really hard. And I feel like a lot of times the community goes back to normal, their
Yep.
day-to-day life, and forget like, oh, the kids are now readjusting to not having the ability to stay home. They're now at a child care facility with lots of other children, and like that
Mhm.
whole stress in itself is that's a big stress, even if you have both your parents around.
Yeah.
So,
But and I created a handout for that. It's called How Do I Help?
mhm,
Because it's wonderful that our community steps forward and says, "How can I help?"
yeah,
But as the grieving person, I don't know how the heck to answer that question.
yeah,
I'm just wanting to survive today. I'm just hoping that I can make it. And so in my handout, I've really laid out the pieces of, if you have kids, here's what you might ask somebody, so that you've already kind of thought out what what do I need? What would I want? And
mhm.
so that you actually get the help you need. Because if I show up with a lasagna casserole, but you already have 5 in the fridge because all the other neighbors have brought them, and your kids don't eat lasagna, that's
Yeah,
really not helpful.
no.
And again, I
Like,
think
can you come do my laundry? I can't
exactly,
do
and
that. Come do my
that's things
laundry.
that I have on my
Oh,
list
okay.
for parents to think about. Like,
Yeah.
do you have somebody that you would be willing to ask to come help with the laundry, to help pick your kids up from school? You know, sometimes you have somebody that you'd be willing to let them cook you a meal, but you don't necessarily want them picking your kids up from school.
Sure.
Or uh, just to, if as mom, if I'm the one who normally picks my kids up from school, maybe that's the part of the routine I want to keep. I don't
Mhm.
want to give that job away, but I would love to give away the job of mowing my lawn, because my husband always did that and now he's not here. And so if somebody else could pick that up, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Again, this handout just really helps parents kind of think about and lay it out when you're not stressed, because on the spot it's hard to know or remember or think about. And this to me is part of our grief illiteracy. As people who are not grieving,
Mhm.
we don't just show up with the groceries, or we don't just show up and say, "Hey, I'm going to give you 2 hours alone and I'm going to take your kids to the park," or, "Hey, I noticed your dog hasn't been walked in a week. And, your wife used to walk the dog every day after she took the kids to school. I'm going to walk your dog." We tend to give the generic question, "How can I help?" Which
So,
sounds great, but it's not always the
yeah.
most helpful in the moment.
So do you think that that same list could be something adults could use too, that not you're not necessarily a parent, but like you're going through grief and you just, or maybe you have a partner who's sick and not going to be there, or a parent that you could use that as a resource for when that time does come, that you can go, oh yeah, these are the ways I need to ask for help.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
where can we find that again?
Um, so I would be happy to share that. I can give a link to you if you want to
Yeah, I'll put it in
include
my
that.
show notes.
Yeah,
Okay, that'd be
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, that sounds, I think that's a fabulous tool, because that is that standard question that we all are like, how can I help? I want to help. Let me know if I can help with anything. And
Mhm.
you never hear from the grieving party.
And yep, yep.
And
Because number one, they don't know what to ask.
yeah,
They
yeah,
don't want to be a burden. They already
yeah,
feel like they have asked for too much,
yeah,
even though most likely they haven't.
right.
Or, they might have thoughts that my village is too small and now I've already asked too much. I've asked all that I can ask for.
Yeah.
And like we talked about, as people who might not be in grief at this moment, our lives did go back to normal.
Hmm.
Our day to day didn't change. We may think about these people, but our day to day routine didn't change. And so we get back in our routine and we forget to ask.
Yeah. Well, that's a good reminder to check in and ask.
Yeah.
So, would you get we were talking a little bit about the play thing again.
Mhm.
Would you share, like, when you think about adults, like, is there Can you give any examples of how that could be a tool for them in their trying to process their grief?
Yeah, again, I think we go back to that example of as adults, when we think of like traditional talk therapy, walk
Mhm,
into the office, I sit down, I talk about my feelings, but
mhm.
I'm not really feeling them, which also means when it comes to topics like play, we're probably not doing
Yeah.
because we don't see it as necessary. We kind of see it as that's not important.
Or
However,
maybe feel like you don't have permission to be
yeah,
playful.
yeah, or if we had some sort of childhood trauma or maybe even a childhood loss where we
Mhm,
had to grow up very
mhm.
quickly, play wasn't part of our daily language. And I think the topic of play and inner child and those kinds of things is more around us than ever before.
Mhm.
And I think many of us, even both of us as entrepreneurs, are seeing the importance of play and
Yeah,
infusing play back into our everyday.
yeah.
And that we don't, again, I think we get caught up in our adult brain, and play has to have a purpose
Mhm.
where the play is the purpose.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Playing,
the whole point.
having fun, lightening up. Yeah,
Yeah,
that it's not that, oh, I'm going to play this because this is going to give me this. It's
yeah.
not a transactional thing
Mhm.
where it's more we're just playing to get back in our body, to remember who we are, what we like about ourselves, where just to relax. Again, I think so many of us just kind of walk through the world doing the things
Mhm.
that
Being
we
adult,
forget.
we're adulting.
Yeah, that we forget to enjoy it. We forget to
Yeah.
just love our life.
Mhm.
And I love the title of your podcast, the Powered by Joy. Like joy and play to me, they go hand in hand
Mhm.
in a lot of ways because what might feel like work at first by being intentional about playing
Yeah.
actually gets us closer to joy.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. And I think, it can feel really awkward and like, like I've done that where I'm like, let's just say I turn on a song and at first I was like, "Ugh." But I know that it works if I just like let myself loose. And I've had times where like I'll call it angry dancing because I'm like having a bad day. So I'm like punching the air and like, "Ah!" I'm like fucking my hands. And then the next thing I know, I'm more playful. But like to start, I'm like, there's massive resistance to even turning on the music and doing it. But I do it now because I know it shifts me and kind of pops me out of where I'm kind of stuck in a rut. But another thing I think about is there's a friend of mine that lost her adult son and she was angry, but she started, it was so interesting to watch her. She really dove into trying to figure out how to reconnect with him. Um, in his spirit form, not in his body. And she was like just wanting to connect to that energy because she missed him. She wanted some signs, from
Mhm,
him.
mhm,
And so we talked about how that he was wanting her to be playful. He on the other side was like, make it a game, make it a game. This is supposed to be fun. Like, we're going to be fun. We used to play when I was around, like, we had that dynamic, and I still want that with you. And
yeah,
she just really stayed open to that idea. And so she started like painting, and she's gifted, but like she started painting. And then she was like, I'm going to just start playing the piano. So she started doing these things that are play and
mhm,
creativity. And
mhm,
it was fascinating. I've never seen someone move so beautifully through grief. Like she was feeling her sadness and things, but she listened to music. She was letting herself just sit in a creative, playful space. And she just got this. I've just never seen anything like it. And I'm going to interview her too, because it was such a powerful thing to witness how she chose to experience the loss of her son through diving into like okay, what is this bringing to me? What is this opening up for me? And like, how can she did it through a lot of play and being creative. And I was just blown away at how she almost seemed to, this does not mitigate her loss, but she seemed to blossom as a person. And I was just like, I've just never seen that before. But
Yeah.
I definitely noticed there was creativity and play and just her being
I,
open and
I
curious
think
that seemed to change
too,
her.
yeah. Well, and the idea of, I heard somebody talk on a podcast, and at the moment I can't think of who said it. Um, but they said our loved ones who have died, they're not lost. But if you listen to the language that we use, we
Mhm, mhm.
often say our lost loved one.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
they're
yeah, we
not
do.
lost. We know where they are. They're not
Mm.
physically here, they're on the other side. They're in spiritual form. Whether you're talking religion or, you know,
Mhm, mhm.
what your beliefs are,
Yeah.
they're physically not here, but they're not lost. If you have a belief, whether that's heaven, whether that's just that their spirit is on the other side, whether it's a more physical or metaphysical uh, adaptation to that,
Mhm.
you know where they're at. But if you use the word lost, it keeps telling your brain that you're supposed to be looking for them, that somehow they can be
Mhm.
found.
Okay.
And in the story that you just shared about your friend, what I heard from that is you helped her connect. You helped her have a connection that was meaningful with her son. So how I look at it as when we die, we're moved to a different frequency. So we're still
Mhm,
here, we just
mhm.
can't be seen. It's like we're on a different radio station.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's not lost. And I think that has helped me in my own experience with grief with my dad is I know he's not lost. I know he's just on a different radio frequency.
Yeah.
And so I know that if I am paying attention to my energy, I can connect with him easier.
Mhm.
But if I assume he's lost, then I don't know where he's at and I'm just looking for him and I'm panicked and I'm
There's
frantic.
sadness and the
Yes.
desperation.
Yeah.
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 I think it's almost like through her playing the piano or painting or cooking or doing a flower arrangement or something, like because she was in that, it raised her frequency. And so then it was like her radio dial tuned into his station. And she has so many epically cool stories of things happening, him showing up. Like she set the intention on Mother's Day that she wanted a butterfly. You know, she just did that privately, but she set that intention. She's like, I want a butterfly from you for Mother's Day. And she didn't tell anybody. And then her spouse got her flowers and there was a little butterfly inside the arrangement. It was like,
Yeah.
what? That's so cool. I'm like, you have to write a book. She has so many examples of him showing up. And I think it's happening because it's not done from a, "Oh, I miss him. I need to see him. I need to hear from him." Like she really embraced that playful, like looking and asking and setting that intention. But then also she spent time like being in that creative, playful space, seemed to dial in that radio station to be able to connect with him energetically easier
Yeah.
because he wasn't
Because
lost.
exactly,
So,
because we can continue those bonds. And
yeah.
that's, yeah, exactly what you said. That's where that play comes in because
Mhm.
it lightens us up. It helps
Yeah.
us improve our energetic frequency. And it also helps us feel our feelings and move them through. So, so again, going back to the buffalo, like we're hitting the storm head on. We're not running from it.
Yeah.
And and I think again, we've been taught that it has to be so difficult, so hard. And it really doesn't. It can be as simple as play. And play can look different for you and
Mhm. Yeah.
one of the things that I like to do at the end of the day is I do some journaling, but I do it more from a drawing format. So I kind of give myself 2 to 5 minutes. I'm going to draw something. I only allow myself to use colored pens so that I don't get wrapped up in, oh, what's the right art supply and trying to do it correctly. And I just say, here's my colored pens, here's what I have. Sometimes I just scribble colors, sometimes I write a quote,
Mhm,
sometimes I draw a picture, but it really helps me kind of get into that playful, creative energy, and it helps clear kind of the end of the day stuff.
mhm,
And it's so simple. And my 12-year-old and I like to do it together.
mm,
And it's kind of opened some of those conversations as well, not only about, oh, what are you drawing? Oh, I'm drawing this, or what made you think about drawing that, but even just more feelings-based conversations in a real easeful, simple way.
mhm.
And sometimes we don't talk at all. Sometimes we're both just drawing, but we're together. And
Yeah.
so, again, just one example of how easy that play can be, or whether it's going outside and sitting by the tree. And
Mhm.
sometimes while I'm sitting there, I'll play with the rocks and the sticks and the dirt. Again, I think we get in our heads and think we have to have some special equipment or we have to do it a certain way. I know my perfectionism can really get in the way sometimes, and I want to do it right.
Yeah.
And so just again, kind of tapping into what kinds of things did I think were fun when I was a kid? What did I enjoy doing? Oh, my sister and I made mud pies and we played with sticks and rocks a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I tried painting, as well in a way, and I was like, "Okay, I love the colors and the idea and all the but, like, the product that comes out does not leave me feeling joyful." I'm like, "Okay." Um, but I did remember that, like, I had lots of coloring books and sticker book I had a sticker book, and I was like, "I love pens and colors," and, like, so I love those kinds of things, so I have found that I get a lot more joy of just sitting down and, like, I won't finish it usually, but, like, just coloring in, like a adult coloring book,
Mhm. Mhm.
and doing that for a little bit will, it seems so simple, but, like, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I loved doing this when I was a kid," and so going back and, like, finding those things that we maybe found ourselves losing track of time doing when we were younger, I think is a good source of ideas sometimes, and it might be really physical and it might be more sitting down and being creative. I found that, like, when I was post-divorce and there was a lot going on with my boys and, we were changing and we had to move a whole bunch of times, I found that, like, a lot of those conversations about our feelings and stuff were best had when I was out literally just throwing the football with them. Like, it was not sitting down face to face on the couch. I would go out and we'd walk the trail, ride our bikes, but sometimes it was throwing the ball at the wall, just standing next to each other, but we weren't looking at each other. But it was like there was that physical movement, there was some sort of play going on. So it was like casual, but I felt like it was a way that they were able to just kind of talk about life, what happened at school, and like process their emotions of what's going on. Um, so that physical movement, I felt like, especially for the boys at that time, I felt like it was a better facilitator than trying to sit down and do something quiet and creative with them to try to get conversation going.
Yeah, because containing them didn't match with their energy. It didn't match with who they were and their personalities. And that's one of the things that my grief storm quiz does, is helps parents kind of understand what type of griever their child is.
Mhm.
And the foundation of the quiz really is about, how does your child handle their emotions?
Oh, okay.
It's about grief, but really, when you start to look at it, it's about, is your child a blizzard grief? And blizzard grief kids stuff their feelings inside. They tell you everything is fine. And so they look like everything is fine on the outside, but on the inside, they have shoved everything inside and they're super quiet and they don't want to say anything that they know might upset you. And
Mm,
again, kind of going back to that egocentric conversation, it's not that it would upset you, it's that they think it would.
Mm-hmm.
And so they keep it all inside. Or is your child, more of that tornado grief where the feelings kind of build up and there's kind of this big explosion and it happens really fast. And as soon as they express their feelings, so whether that comes out like anger or this big emotional outburst, they feel better and they move on. And you're, as a parent, are kind of like, oh, that just happened. Now what? Or is it more like hurricane grief where it's building, it's building, it's building. You can see it coming. You just don't know when it's coming. And when it does come out, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt you because they're going to go outward with their feelings. And I think a lot of parents have rain shower grief because they're more apt to be able to talk about their feelings. And we kind of have this expectation that their kids will be able to share.
Mm.
Or sometimes it's the opposite. Our kids are more rain shower grief. And so they talk about their feelings. For instance, one of my daughters is a rain shower grief. She's able to talk about and express her feelings. And she cries. We talk about that's just her emotions coming out of her eyes because she cries, whether she's sad, happy, mad, she's going to cry. But if you're a parent who is not comfortable with your feelings, so maybe you are more of that blizzard grief. If your child is rain shower grief and is expressive and able to talk about their emotions, but you are not, and it makes you really uncomfortable as that blizzard grief, you're going to struggle. There's going to be issues because you're wanting to shut the conversation down, but your child really wants to talk about it.
Mm.
And so again, this quiz is such a simple way to figure out what type of grief storm you are, but the results from it are big in the sense of this really can change how you interact and talk about grief in your household. And I have a lot of specifics that I can teach parents on, okay, my child is this type of grief. Now what? Oh, okay, here's these certain ways that you can ask the questions. Here's, just like you learned with your boys, that more physical movement helped them talk about their emotions. I often give parents the tip of car chats. Car chats can be a wonderful place because you're contained in the car, but you don't have to make eye contact, just like we're saying with throwing the ball next to each other.
Yeah.
Like your eyes are on the road because obviously we don't want you looking here. We want you looking forward to know what's coming. But your child is going to be more inclined to talk to you because they don't feel the pressure of you staring at them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be more apt to give you a little bit more information than if you were sitting on the couch side by side. And I think, again, this is kind of that grief illiteracy. We kind of have this idea that we can sit down and have one chat about grief and then it's all going to be better. But it's not. It is lots of mini conversations. Those mini 3 to 5 minute conversations are what's planting the seeds to be able to have healthy grief.
Wow. Thinking about those little, it's like having those little conversations. So then there's not the big storm, right? Where like, it's like have an umbrella or something, like it's like that safety of just like creating that safe environment under the umbrella that like, oh, we talk about it here. It's open. Like that's going to happen. We talk about our feelings here. Just feeling affirmed. I think creating that safe space. I think even in like, I think about feminine and masculine energy and how like the feminine wants a safe, contained space to express. And if we don't feel that safety, like a lot of that feminine energy will not be expressed and the creativity doesn't happen. The playfulness doesn't happen. There's all this restriction and like just withdrawing and tightening and not expressing. So I just think same thing kind of the same concept, like creating that safe container for the kids or our loved one can be, everything you're saying, I'm like, well, this applies to adults too. This applies to adults too. Like I'm thinking
Absolutely.
I should probably take your grief storm quiz because that would help me know how I process things, I can
Yeah,
guess,
absolutely.
but I can see how it would even be helpful, even between like couples and things like that too. So
Absolutely.
that'll be
Absolutely.
another resource we'll make sure we put in the show notes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
It's at
Yeah.
griefstorm.com.
Okay.
From
Oh,
quiz.com. Quiz.com.
griefstormquiz.com. Okay,
Mhm.
awesome. Well, I'll definitely put that in the
But
show
yes,
notes.
I will get that to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we covered a lot of stuff. Is there a question that you wish that I had asked that I haven't? Like something you're really passionate about that you want to share?
I don't know that I feel like we covered a lot of things, but I don't know that I have any questions.
Okay. And then we just talked about the quiz, but like what are you working on and what are you doing right now? Like you are working on coaching people with grief, especially like parents and families. So will you share with us like the best way people can find you and what you're working on right now?
Mhm. Yeah, so my main website is AnnetteAthy.com. Um, and that has my current offers, and I'm actually in the middle of kind of changing my offers. And so it's so great that you brought me on because I'm actually adding some play things in there, and wanting to create kind of some resources for parents to have a video or an activity where they can sit down with their child and talk about grief in a way that feels like, okay, here's a way we can, again, those small little mini ways we can talk about grief where it doesn't feel so overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
that introduces play in the house. Because I think a lot of times what happens is with kids popping in and out of grief, we don't always remember that they're going to look okay for a day or two or for a couple months, and then something's going to come up. And so if we can be doing these almost preventative type grief conversations, starting those chats, it doesn't have to be with a professional, but I want to provide parents with tools that they can use at home, because I do feel like parents are the expert of their kids. They know their kids best.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really want to support and empower parents. And so maybe that's working with me for a couple of sessions and then taking these tools and using them at home. I have never been in favor of those professionals that kind of create lifetime clients.
Mm-hmm.
My goal is always I want to give my clients the most tools, the most tips, the most ways. I think you labeled them my golden eggs. That I want to give them the golden eggs where they
Yeah.
can do what they do as parents and do it in the most effective, most efficient way, because I completely come from that point of view of let's work smarter, not harder. And so if I can give you a few ways to make what you're doing more efficient, and that prevents you from being the cow and running away from the storm for years,
Yeah.
let's tackle it now. Even if your kids are 3, 4, 5 years old, let's start those grief conversations where they become so normal in your household that you don't end up with teenagers who are struggling reaching out for love and attention in unhealthy ways because they have this unhealed, unattended grief that
Mm-hmm.
just didn't get talked about because your child didn't bring it up, that
Yeah.
you waited for them to initiate.
Yeah.
And so again, really from this preventative piece, is really what I want to do in working with parents. And again, how I work with them are one-on-one with the parents, but also bringing in the kids into our sessions where I coach the parent to really prepare for these conversations, to take a look at why are they holding back from having the conversation. So maybe it's a little bit of unhealed grief for them. And if we can get to the root of that and address that, it's going to make it just so much better for the entire family. Because if the parent is okay, most likely their child's going to be okay too.
Yeah. And we did talk about that a bit too, is how you may be bringing in children to work with, but oftentimes it's actually helping the parents process grief as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's, well, I think that this is a very untapped, subject that, I think there's a lot of space for growth here. So I was really excited that you were willing to come on and talk with me about it, because I do think that, the more we can normalize these conversations in our homes, like it just makes more space for healing, which also means there's more space for and capacity to hold joy and play in our lives, and that things can be easeful too, if we do a little bit of the work and reach out for those resources. So I'm so happy that you're out there offering these resources to people. So I will, of course, like I said, put all of that in the show notes so that anybody that wants to reach out to you for all of your golden eggs and wisdom and the grief quiz, the grief storm quiz, those are all sound like really great resources for people. So yeah, thank you for joining me.
I'm so happy that you asked me to speak with you today and that we got to talk about all these things. So
Yeah. All
So-
right. Well, you'll probably have to come back on again. I'm sure we'll have
I-
more we can
I
talk
would
about.
love that. I
Yeah,
would
we'll
love
dig
that.
in some more. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I just again wanted to thank you for joining me in my first interview with Dr. Athy. I felt like Annette gave us so many amazing tools and tips and a different new perspective on having conversations and normalizing talking about grief and loss, even before we suffer loss in a family. If we see that coming down the path for us, or even not in the near future, how powerful it can be to start having conversations around death and loss and grief, so that it is a part of our normal conversation and it normalizes expressing grief and sadness. I feel like that can open up more paths for healing. And I just felt so blessed to get access to her grief storm quiz. I think that can be a real powerful tool, along with how many times have we heard, like, are you in that moment where you're wanting to offer help and support to someone who's just gone through a loss and you just don't know what to do? So she has an awesome handout for that that's in the show notes too. And it's also a way for you to know how to offer help, but also if you're the person who's experienced loss and you're just swimming in the BS, pain, overwhelmed, can't think straight, it's a way to like hand that list to someone who's asking and offering help. Give it to them and say any of these things, or look at it and say, oh, I need help with the laundry today. So please utilize those tools. Check out her website. And I just want to make sure you remember to share this with anyone you know that is struggling with grief or processing it or having conversations, or you're just curious. We definitely need to share these tools more and more so it's accessible to everybody and we get the word out there that there are wonderful people out there that can coach us and help us through these parts of our lives. And I would love it if you would like and follow along also on my videos. And I would lastly love it if you would share any other feedback you have of any other topics you'd like me to cover with other interviews. I have some others coming up, but even specifically with Dr. Athy, if there's another thing you wanted us to really dive into in regards to grief, I would love to hear about it. So please share any of those or any takeaways you had specifically, or learning ahas you had about this episode. Again, thank you for listening and I will see you soon.